Hello, and welcome to another video to benefit Eve University. I'm Amoni Panala, and this is one of my class videos that I make to help Eve University. We often get requests to record our classes, and I personally don't feel comfortable putting people on the spot by recording their questions. So what I've done instead is recorded this class. So today we're going to talk about moving on from Eve University. Now, to some degree, this is going to apply to anyone who is thinking about moving on from the very first corp that they started the game in. Um, Moving on from your first player corp, especially if it was a new player corp, um, is kind of a big deal. So we're going to talk about moving on from Eve University, um, but some of this may apply to folks who are looking at moving on from other new player corps. So we're going to talk about why you might want to leave uni. We're going to talk about the ways that you can find the next corp that you're going to join. And we'll talk about things that you should consider before you leave, whether you're going to leave an alt in that corp. Some corps don't allow you to leave an alt in the corp. So Eve University is kind of unique in a lot of ways. One of the things that they do allow you to do is to leave an alt in Eve University. In fact, it's kind of hoped that you will, because then you can provide additional like support to the uni. A lot of the staff and folks like that are alts of people who have moved on from Eve University. So it should not surprise anyone that Eve University allows people to leave alts, but there are some things to consider about whether you do that or not. We'll talk about work history, moving your assets. We'll talk about culture shock, and we'll talk about having fun and what you should do if you're not. So, first and foremost, you should leave because you want to. Don't stay in Eve University if you don't want to stay there. It may seem a bit like, what do you mean, because I want to, especially if you just got into Eve University and you're having a blast. There's so much stuff to do, so many things you can try, and it seems like there's always stuff happening. That is normal. And you know what? Just play it out. Try everything. Um, but you may reach a point where you're like, you know what? I'm kind of like over this. I am experiencing too much friction and I want to go. That's just fine. That's when it's a good time to leave Eve University. Better to leave before you become bitter towards Eve University. Better to leave when you're ready to leave. Um, you should also leave because uh, you're running into problems where the rules of engagement, Eve University's rules of engagement, don't allow you to play the way that you want to play. So that could be playing in Sovnal, right? Um, the game really is very different in Sovnal. Um, I don't. It's hard to describe just how different it is. We, Eve University has the nullsec community where folks can get a taste of what it's like in nullsec, but there's a whole other aspect of the game that comes into play when you are in Sovnal. And there's also the whole thing of like being in Sovnal means being a part of bigger groups. Um, unlike unlike Eve University, where yes, you're a part of a bigger group, but that bigger group is also supporting, several different stagings as opposed to one staging where all of the resources are devoted to keeping and maintaining that staging. It's a very different experience. Um, Another thing that you might, if you're into structure bashing, that's cool. I find that incredibly boring. But you know what? some people really want to do it, and you can make a lot of money structure bashing. So if that's the kind of thing you want to do, it's not allowed in Eve University, um, and that might be a thing that you move on from Eve University for. You should also move on from Eve University if you are considering high-sec piracy. Now, high-sec piracy is explicitly forbidden in Eve University, but it is a way that some people like to play the game. And if that is you, then it may be time to move on from Eve University. We've had a number of people from Eve University move on to high-sec piracy, and that is just fine. But you won't be able to do it while you're in Eve University. You might also join because you've been invited to join by another corp. If you've been hanging out with other people outside of Eve University, it is very possible to strike up friendships, and really get a sense that, like, okay, this other corp that I've been, folks I've been hanging out with there, they really want me to come join them, and you might get invited, whether that's, through in-game mechanics or just sort of like through conversation. They're like, yeah, if you apply now, we're going to accept you in a heartbeat because we really want you in our corp. That's a great reason to leave. You might also join a corp that is better aligned with your time zone. This is especially true for folks who are in the Pacific time zone, also referred to as the AU time zone or Australian time zone. Um, those hours are tend to be very difficult for Eve University. It's not completely dead, but it is definitely a lot quieter. And so for folks who are in that time zone, it may be easier to seek out AU time zone or Pacific time zone folks. Um, you might also just find that you are experiencing a lot of friction. You're irritated. You feel like you're constantly at odds with the university. You feel like you're bucking up against the rules and you're bucking up against leadership. Those kinds of things are just natural growing pains that come with, maybe being a little beyond Eve University's level of support. Eve University is great at helping new players get started, learning how to explore things. They got people with the patience of saints. I am not one of those people. I don't even know what I'm doing in Eve University because I am not a patient person, at least not in this regard, but whatever. So if you find yourself just constantly irritated with things that Eve University does, it may be time to consider leaving, because this is a game. You should be having fun. And if you're irritated with Eve University, just move on. I promise it's not the end of the world. Now the question comes, how do you find your next corp? Okay, so we're going to use a bit of business language, cold and warm contacts, right? So cold being you've never talked to the people that you're applying for before, and you don't really know anything about them aside from maybe what you've read about them. And so what you're going to do is you can find on Reddit, they have r/Eve Jobs board, which is a excellent resource for finding corporations of all different kinds, whether it's wormhole, whether it's high class wormhole or low class wormhole, whether it's Sobnull. If you want to find, you can find big alliance big alliances to join or small corporations under a bigger alliance. Whatever you might want to find, you can probably find it on our Eve Jobs. Now, our Eve Jobs board is great for you can find postings from corporations that are advertising. You can also post what you're looking for and potentially get contacted by a recruiter who thinks that you might be a good fit. You can also use the EVE Online forums because apparently EVE Online is stuck in 2005 or 2005, however you want to say it. Um, Folks are just stuck there, I guess. I mean, EVE Online is a very strange game because it's like a time capsule of a very specific era in internet history, and so it has forums, a thing that most communities do not have. Most communities just use Discord, but Eve still has forums, and one of the forums is specifically for finding your next corp. It's called the Recruitment Center, and if you go there, you can find posts by recruiters letting folks know, like, hey, we're out there. Do you want to join us? Do you want to be a part of us? Here's our time zone. Here's what we're about. Here's our minimum requirements. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, all that good stuff. So you can find that on the EVE Online. Go to their website, go to the community section. You'll find the forums there, and then find the recruitment center. And that's where you want to be if you want to look for a new corp. Eve University also maintains something similar to this. It's called our work fair, and generally this is posted in by alumni. So when I was in Novak, I made a post as a recruiter to advertise what Novak is about and what the requirements are, and moving on from there. So alumni are generally the ones that are posting there. And it just kind of lets you know, hey, here's what we're about, here's what the requirements are, things like that. Very similar to the recruitment center on Eve Online's forums, as well as the our Eve's jobs board. Okay, so pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Now, there are a number of ways that you might have a warm contact. This is where you've talked to somebody from the corp, or you know people from another corp, and you're thinking about reaching out to them to join their corp. So this could be friends, right? Someone from Eve University moves on from that corp, or a group of you want to start your own corp. And I will say right at the top, starting your own corp is very hard, and it kind of depends on what you want to do with your corp. But I just want to put a flag in it. I put it there because it is something you could do. It's totally an option, and people have done it before coming out of Eve University, but it is probably the hardest option on this list. So you might meet people in MPSI fleets. So not purple, shoot it, right? This is your Spectre fleet. This is your Fun Inc., your Bombers Bar. You might meet people there who are all about something that you are really into. It might be PvP. In fact, with MPSI, it's very likely that it's PvP. Um, and a lot of these groups also have their own like little recruiting channels on their discords, and so you might come across, find that people you've been flying with in these groups, uh, you really like them, and so you join one of their corps. Another one for all the Care Bears, because we do appreciate you, is the public mining fleets. So public mining is still a thing, although I don't see it nearly as much as I did back in 2019, but it's still a thing that I have seen around. And if you join a public mining fleet, you might find some people that you like mining with. And that's a perfectly valid way of finding your next corp, because maybe you decide, you know what, their corp offers X, Y, and Z thing that I really like, and I want to get into that corp. That is actually how some of my friends from Eve University found their corp to move on to, and it's incredibly wonderful that they were able to do that. Um, if you are big into faction warfare, you might decide that you want to actually join a faction warfare corp. So these are not to be confused with the NPC corps that you can join when you're in faction warfare. If you leave Eve University and you're enlisted in faction warfare, you will automatically go to the NPC faction warfare corp. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about player-owned corps that do faction warfare. Like that's their primary content. And so if you really like faction warfare and you want to be a part of a corp that supports your content, supports you doing faction warfare all the time. Join one of the player-owned corps for your faction, um, for your faction's militia. Um, you might also end up participating in streamer events. So uh, there's a bunch of EVE Online streamers, and some of them host public events that you can participate in. And maybe you join one of those events and realize, you know what, the corp that this streamer is in is pretty cool, actually, and I think I want to join this corp. Awesome. You might also participate in a CCP event. Um, Similar to the streaming events, you go there, you meet people, maybe you end up, striking up a friendship with folks there, and you decide, you know what, I really like this corp. I like the people I met there. I think it's got the right vibe for me, and you join that corp. Awesome. You might also run into frenemies or opponents that you kill, and you're like, you know what, these are some awesome people. They came out and fought us even when, you know, XYZ conditions. Um, that is actually how I came up with a list of corps that I wanted to fly with when I was first considering leaving Eve University. I was thinking about hey, these people, we fought them, they're really cool. Um, and also, if you get blown up by somebody who you think is really cool, um, you may end up being like, you know what? Yeah, I actually think I might like this corp. Um, and of course, the alumni don't just hang around to reminisce about how great Eve University was. A lot of them are there to show support for Eve University and to help people. And you know, so use alumni as a resource. Now, don't be a jerk, ask nicely, but Eve University does have a alumni channel where you can ask your questions about any corps that you've heard of or ask them about the corps that they're in. This is what I did when I was thinking about hey, I think it's time for me to move on from Eve University. Where do I go? And Eve University, or some of the alumni, I should say, they were super helpful in answering some questions I had about what it was like there, and that's how I ended up in Novak. So now, before you leave, there's a few things that you should probably take care of, because uh, things are going to be very different once you move on from Eve University, and uh, you should not assume that it's going to be like having an alt in another corporation. No, this is, you're moving your main and all your stuff, and you're probably going to be spending most of your time in this other corp. Eve University is just going to be a footnote on your work history. All right? That's generally how you want to think of this. Okay? And however else, whether you have positive or negative opinions of Eve University once your time is up at Eve University, that's fine. If you decide that you want to still be involved in Eve University, you may decide that you want to leave an alt there. Now, there's a number of ways you could do it. You could leave an alpha alt, right? Just to kind of have that character there so you can be in the Discord, see the conversations that happen behind the members only side of things. Um, you might also spring for an Omega, and maybe that Omega is going to actually be involved in, staff roles that require Omega skills. Um, but do be careful, because having an alt in Eve University can be like an anchor pulling you down to the bottom of the ocean. And what I mean by this is having an alt in Eve University means that you may feel tempted to spend way too much time in Eve University. And because Eve University is familiar, it may you may find yourself spending way too much time there and not enough time in your main corp. Now, every corp is different, But for example, when I was in Novak, at the time that I joined, they had a rule where you had to pull all your alts out of player-owned corps. They've since changed this rule or relaxed this rule a bit. You don't have to pull your alts out. It's on a case-by-case basis. But at the time, they wanted me to pull all my alts out specifically because they didn't want me to spend too much time with Eve University in that first month while I was getting acclimated. They wanted me to be involved in the corp. They wanted to get to know me and make sure that I was a right fit for Novak. Cool. Now, you might leave an alt for a number of reasons. You might do it so you can teach classes. This was the primary reason that I was in Eve University. I wanted to teach. I wanted to continue doing that. Um, I really love teaching, and so I wanted to leave an alt there. And I currently have an alt in Eve University for being involved in supporting Eve University. I don't teach classes as much right now. I'm kind of scaling back how involved I am in Eve University because there is so much to do in my main corp. Um, so you might also stay to FC. You might stay to participate in logistics or administrative roles, which is exactly what I'm doing. Whatever it might be, um, it is important to recognize that if you put in alt, you can transfer your titles. So, like graduate, you can transfer that over to your new alt. But medals are character specific. So any medals that you've earned on your main character are not going to transfer over. They're going to stay with your main character, and Eve University is not going to give you new medals on your alt. You can earn new medals, right? So like Amoni has medals. Zipporah, I think, also has medals, and Camille certainly has medals from things that I've done. But those are things that those medals were earned on each of those characters respectively. They weren't medals that were transferred over. They were medals that I earned on those characters. And as I said, you may not be allowed to have an alt in Eve University immediately upon joining your new corp. It depends on the rules of the corp. Novak, at the time that I joined, was very much like, no, 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 no. You need to pull all your alts out of player-owned corps, and then after a month, after your trial is over, then you can put your alt back in Eve University if you want to. So that's what I did. When I went to Brave, specifically Incredible, uh, they said they would prefer that I pull all my alts out of player-owned corps, but I asked specifically. I was like, "Hey, it would be a real inconvenience if I have to pull my alt out for a certain amount of time and then put the alt back into Eve University after a certain amount of time. Is there any way I can just leave it there?" And they said, okay, as long as Brave doesn't go to war with Eve University, it should be fine. And to my knowledge, Eve University has no plans to go to war with Brave. So I think I'm okay there. Um, Another thing to consider, and this is not a big thing, um, but some people like a good clean work history. And what does that mean? Well, when you drop corp to join another corp, if you simply leave the corporation, you will automatically be put in an NPC corp, and it might be the one that you started in, it might be another one within your faction, right? But you're going to end up in an NPC corp, and then you accept the invite from the other corp, your new corp, and so now you have on your work history 1 day in an NPC corp. So it'll be like Eve University, then 1 day in, the State War Academy or whatever. I'm just using Caldari as an example. But you have one in the State War Academy, and then you have your new corp, right? Now, if you're the kind of person who wants a nice, clean work history, and some people do, it's totally fine. I actually try to keep a clean work history on my main, so that it's easier when I join new corps. They can look at my work history in game and see where I've been, and it's not a huge deal. Um, you can instead drop roles. So this is different from dropping corp. You can drop roles. And then there's a 24-hour cooldown, and then you can accept the invite from your new corp, and it goes straight from Eve University to your new corp. Now that 24-hour thing is kind of a pain in the butt. So it may not be worth it to you to wait that long. I did not wait on all my characters. I just did it on my main. And of course, do make sure that you move all your assets out of any of the stagings, especially Wormhole, Null, and Lowsec. Eve University doesn't have an official staging for Lowsec, um, but if you have assets in Lowsec or near the Lowsec area where Eve Uni is involved, make sure that you move your stuff out of there because it will be very hard to move your stuff once you've left Corp. And for Wormhole community, it will be almost impossible. Um, of course, folks at Eve University are very friendly and want to be helpful, and they will probably help you if you ask nicely. But it's better just to move all your stuff out ASAP. So move your stuff out of Wormhole, move your stuff out of Null staging, and for sure out of Low. If you leave your stuff in high sec staging, unless your corp is, um, unless your corp has been marked as -5 and revoked access to docking, you should be able to still get your stuff out of high sec staging, but it's better just to get rid of it all. And honestly, when I moved on from Eve University over to Novak, I basically just put all my stuff on buyback. Like I kept a few ships, but most of it I just put on buyback, and I gave a big donation. I think it was like 500 mil or something like that, as a donation to Eve University for taking all my crap off my hands, and I got a nice chunk of money out of it. So that is honestly the easiest way to do it. Obviously, that's not going to work for everyone, but you don't want to bring a bunch of stuff from Eve University over to your new corp unless you know that that stuff is going to be useful. Because frankly, when you move on to a new corp, everything is going to be different. And how different it is going to depend on the specific corp that you join. But it can be a real pain to move your stuff around. And even now, like I've moved from Novak to Brave, and I've got, when I left Novak, I had a bunch of crap that I just didn't know what to do with. So I brought it to Jita, and I ended up selling most of it because how am I going to get it to Brave staging, and what am I going to do with it when it gets there? Like, these are all things that were important to me when I was in Novak, but I'm not in Novak anymore. I'm in Brave. So, same with Eve University. The stuff that was important to me in Eve University was not important to me once I got to Novak. And, you know, there were a few more things that were important to me in Novak that transferred over to Eve University or from Eve University, things like my scanning ships and things like that. But other than that, none of that crap mattered. Another thing you should be aware of is the culture shock. So, um, Eve University has a lot of rules that are intended to try and make Eve University as accessible and friendly as possible. So, like, we frequently are bringing up unicoms, right? Which I have said a couple times on my videos. Unicoms just refers to the rules around how we talk, and they're important, they're good. The thing about Eve Online is that most other corps are not like Eve University, right? In a lot of ways. But one of those ways is in the culture, right? And that can vary from anything to, uh, just profanity, right? So, like, Brave is very similar in its culture to Eve University. However, they do use profanity. Profanity is allowed, and plenty of people use it, including myself. I am a foul mouthed person, and I use profanity all the time, just not at Eve University. This should not discourage you from moving on from Eve University. There are plenty of corps who are much more chill and don't use profanity. Places like Signal Cartel or the graduates make a point of saying, hey, like, this is not what we're about. If you join us, please expect that we are going to conduct ourselves differently than other places in Eve. If that's not a thing that bothers you, then great. You're going to not have a problem finding a corp where you will fit in that regard. But it is worth pointing out that EVE Online is an online game, and the culture is determined by the people who are in that corp, and what corps will allow varies differently, widely, from Eve University. And so be aware that that is a thing that can take some getting used to. Um, some are lean very heavily into meme culture, into, harsh jokes and things like that. That may not be for you. Be aware, and it's worth asking a recruiter about the kind of culture that the corp has when you're considering joining. Um, and that will tell you a lot about whether that corp is right for you. Also, be aware that the rules are very different, and I don't just mean in terms of culture, but in terms of the kind of content you can engage in, what you're expected to do for the corp, what the level of involvement that the corp expects from you, things like that. Be aware of the kind of services that the corp asks uh, asks of you and offers you. So, in addition to your involvement, they may also have different offerings in terms of services. So, Eve University tries to make uh, everything as accessible as possible to all its members, especially new players. And so, we have things like hauling, we have buyback, we have SRP. All these things work differently in different corps. So, for example, in Brave Alliance, we only do buyback for very specific things that the corp needs, and the rest of it is privately managed buyback from different corps within the alliance or within the coalition. Um, and so what I can sell to buyback varies depending on whether I'm selling it to corp or whether I'm selling it to one of the private buybacks. Um, and that's going to vary widely based on what corp you join. In Novak, there was basically no buyback. It was, you could sell blue loot and you could sell ore because those were things that the corp needed to continue operating. The blue loot helped pay for fuel structures or fuel for the structures and things like that. But buyback varies differently. SRP varies differently. SRP in Novak was like, yeah, you'll pretty much get the cost of your ship back, for the most part. Like, it depended on what you were flying, and based on your role and things like that. But SRP was really, really good. Whereas in Brave, SRP is determined by who the FC is, what rank of FC is flying, and what doctrine you're flying. So, like, fun fleets have minimal SRP. Those are just things that you go out and you fly, and you do it for fun, and you know, fly cheap. Because if you can't afford to replace it, well, SRP is only going to give you so much. But on like things like StratOps, you might get full SRP for that. It just depends. So every corp is different, every alliance is different, and corps within alliances may do things a little differently. It depends. So that's something you should also ask a recruiter if you're concerned about that. Um, in Novak, like hauling was all done by basically just I did my own hauling for everything. Um, in Brave, I can I can get hauling done thanks to one of the logistics corps in the alliance that does hauling, and it does cost money. I have to pay ISK for that, but it is available. So whereas Eve University does not charge for hauling unless you're using it to make a profit. Um, Hauling in Brave cost me money. In Novak, I had to do all my own hauling. So every corp is going to be different, and what it looks like is going to be different. It's worth asking recruiter about that. Doctrine requirements are also going to be different. So in Eve University, um, there are no doctrine requirements. There are ships that we fly on the regular that are part of our doctrines, but you aren't required to fly them. If you don't want to fly them, you don't have to. That's Eve University's way. It is the most free and open and do whatever you want kind of thing. The only exception that I can think of um, is WHC. Wormhole Community has doctrine requirements that you do have to fly. And it's worth pointing out that while everything is very much do whatever you want, you don't get to bring whatever ship you feel like to a fight when a doctrine is called. You are expected to fly the doctrine. So you are encouraged to fly those so that, or train into those so that you can fly what other people are flying. But if you don't want to fly in fleets, you don't have to train those ships. If you join another corp, you may be expected to train into their doctrines. And if you don't, you may get kicked for inactivity or for non participation. So it's worth keeping that in mind. Um, the training requirements, they might ask you to train certain things, not just because of doctrines, but also because they're looking for a certain performance level from your flying and from your ships. So in addition to training into specific doctrines to be able to fly, you might also have to train certain support skills so that you can get them up. So, for example, flying Logi, right? They in Novak, flying Logi meant that I also had to train up certain support skills so that I couldn't get jammed out, right? That was an expectation of me, what I was required to train it to versus what I wanted to train it to so that I could be the best pilot that I was. Uh, it was different, but I was expected to have certain skills trained to be able to perform well on fleets. And that's going to be true in a variety of corps that you might join. So be aware of that. Also be aware of war. War is a constant thing in EVE Online. It makes the content go. But I'm not just talking about the kind of high sec wars that EVE University has every once in a while. I'm also talking about like big coalition or alliance-wide wars. So these kinds of wars are not the kind that you are going to see up in the little corner of your overview that tell you, hey, you're at war with this corp. No, these are wars that are entirely player driven. And these are the kind of wars that can go on for months, even years. And it's the kind of thing that you should be aware might be happening because not only will you be at war with someone, but you might also have allies. And one of the things that I remember happening the first time I considered joining Brave was they were like, hey, we noticed that you have goons set to -5. Are you willing to change that? Because if you're going to join us, we're allied with goons and you need to not have them -5. Well, turns out that I had goons set to -5 on my personal contacts because I had certain preconceptions about who goons were and what they were like. And, you know, biases upon biases and assumptions upon assumptions. But it is important to be aware that wars can radically change the way that you play the game, and um, during times of big wars, it might be crucial that you understand what the conflict is, and it may feel a bit overwhelming at times if you join a corp while they're in the heat of a big war. So it is worth asking the recruiter about that kind of thing, especially if you're joining a Sovnal corp. And obviously, this is a game. It can be hard to remember that sometimes because, uh, people put so much effort into this game, into being better at this game, into getting the most out of this game, into all kinds of things, and it can be a lot of times, and you can lose perspective sometimes that this is just a game, and you should be having fun. And if you're not having fun, it is okay to leave. It is okay to move on from Eve University. It is okay to move on from a corp that you are not having fun in. And one thing I will point out is that when you join a new corp, there is going to be that culture shock, right? That I talked about earlier. And it is worth pointing out that at first it might be a real struggle. It might feel like, oh my gosh, did I make a huge mistake leaving Eve University? I'm not sure if I'm really ready to leave Eve University. You might be doubting yourself. Give it a little time, right? Give it a little time. Get to know the people in the corp, get a feel for the vibe, and if after a little bit you're like, you know what, I'm not having fun. This is miserable. I maybe in a different context I might have had a good time with this corp, or maybe the corp is not what you thought it was and you just didn't have enough information at the time. That can happen. Just leave. Just leave. This is a game, okay? It's a game. Um, you're not obligated to stay there just because you committed to joining this new corp. Just leave. It's not worth it. And if that's the position you find yourself in and you're not sure where you want to go next, maybe consider participating in public events. Consider participating in MPSI fleets and just be in an NPC corp. And when it comes time and you're considering joining a new corp, just tell the recruiter like, "Hey, I tried out this one corp. It ended up not being for me because I didn't realize like X, Y, and Z, or I just felt like this wasn't the right fit for me after all. And so I spent a little time just doing my own thing so that I could, you know, be away from Eve University while also not fully committing myself to yet another corp. That's totally fine. And if you're one of those wormholers that just cannot stay away from wormholes, you could go the nomad direction. You could fit yourself up with what I call the Winnebago Orca. I can't take full credit for that because somebody else was the one who told me about the Winnebago Orca. But essentially, you just put all your crap in an Orca and you would go from wormhole to wormhole, right? If you've seen my Living in Wormholes class, then you know what I'm talking about. If you don't, go watch my Living in Wormholes or Wormhole Living class, okay? There's also the Worm Life Alliance. Wow, I'm really struggling to speak today. Worm Life Alliance is a alliance that maintains a number of structures in a variety of different holes, and unless you've taken repeated violent action against people in those wormholes before, um, they allow you to dock up and use their stations in those wormholes. So, in theory, you could live out of one of these wormholes if you wanted to and play that way. So, you could still get a bit of that wormhole life while also not committing yourself to a wormhole court. So, those are some options for you if you find that, you know what, I tried it and I know I don't want to be in Eve University, but I'm not sure really where I want to go yet. I'm just going to do my own thing for a while. Perfectly valid. Now, there's no live class as per usual, but if you do have questions, you can leave them as a comment on this video and I will try to get to them as soon as possible. I can't promise to answer all questions, and I do see that people occasionally leave me comments. If I don't respond in any way, it's not because your comment was bad, it was just because I either didn't know what to say or it didn't seem like the kind of comment that like needed a response, and so I just wanted to let that comment mellow. Um, it's not because you did anything wrong, um, but do feel free to leave questions in the video, and um, otherwise, give this video a like and share it with your friends who may be considering leaving their new player corp or thinking about, what would it look like to leave your new player corp or leave Eve University. And of course, subscribe to the channel if you want to keep updated on new videos that I put out. In addition to class videos, I also put out fight videos, and occasionally I make other videos like I did an analysis of Equinox based on the big news blurb that CCP put out. I will try to make more videos of that because it seems like people like that. So I will probably do more of those. And if you have other ideas for the kinds of videos that you'd like to see, or classes that you would like me to do, I can certainly I'm certainly open to hearing what your ideas are. I'd love to make more content that speaks to what folks are looking for, um, given everything that I have made so far. So, with that, I wish you all the best. Fly safe.